Welcome, dear listener. As the hum of the modern world begins to fade, let your thoughts drift back, far back, to a time when medicine was as mysterious as the stars, and illness was often seen as a punishment from beyond. Tonight, we will journey through the winding corridors of history, peering into the lives of those brave or, perhaps unfortunately, enough to practice medicine in the distant past. This is not the story of sterile gloves and stainless steel, nor is it a tale of beeping machines and neat white coats. No, tonight we descend into a different sort of clinic, one scented with herbs and smoke, where knowledge and guesswork often shared the same cramped shelf. Over the next 2 hours, you'll walk in the heavy boots of a plague doctor, trace the rise of a genius from the Islamic Golden Age, examine curious and ancient surgical tools, and sit in on the peculiar rituals of royal physicians. So take a deep breath, let your shoulders relax, and imagine yourself far from your own time, a gentle world of candlelight, parchment, and whispered prayers awaits. Let us begin with your first appointment, not as a patient, but as a medieval plague doctor. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a cobbled street in 14th century Europe. It is early morning, though the sun barely pierces the thick gray mist that clings to the rooftops. You shift the stiff leather of your heavy cloak and adjust the cumbersome beak mask over your face. Inside the mask, sweet-smelling herbs, lavender, rosemary, and perhaps a sprig of mint do their best to mask the rot that hangs in the air like a damp curtain. You are a plague doctor, and your day has just begun. Your boots make soft, deliberate taps as you walk. The city is quiet, too quiet, except for the occasional distant cough or the low moan of someone already too far gone. Your first visit is to a small house nestled between a bakery and a butcher. The smell of meat and bread has long been overpowered by something else thick, heavy, and unmistakably grim. Inside, a family waits. The mother's face is pale, her lips cracked from fever. The child in her arms does not move. You do not know much, no one does, not really, but you perform the rituals expected of you. A visual inspection, a few muttered Latin phrases. You carry a small stick to prod at swollen buboes from a distance. To touch them directly would be foolish. You scribble something onto parchment. It's mostly for show. Few can read it, and fewer still will live long enough for it to matter. You leave a sachet of herbs behind, whisper that the air must be cleansed. Outside, you breathe in through the mask again. Rosemary, fennel, vinegar. The city has instructed all homes to burn damp hay and rub walls with onions. It doesn't help, but people feel better when they're doing something. Your next visit takes you across town, past a monastery. A monk waves you over. A brother lies curled in a narrow cot, a rosary wrapped tightly in his fingers. You reach into your bag of tools, a leather pouch of dried toads, perhaps some leeches, a small jar of amber-hued urine. It's believed that the balance of bodily humors must be restored. 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. You don't entirely understand them, but you believe in them. Everyone does. You might suggest bleeding or induce vomiting, sometimes both, sometimes neither. Your treatments are as much performance as they are prescription. You hear screaming in the distance. It is not unusual. Sickness brings panic, and panic brings desperation. You move on. A town crier approaches you. He offers a coin to inspect his armpit. He thinks he's found a swelling there. You peer closely. It's just a boil. not plague, not yet. You advise garlic poultices and cool compresses. He nods and presses the coin into your gloved palm. You won't spend it. You've heard coins carry disease too. Best to burn it later. The hours pass slowly. You stop at a well to rinse your hands in rosewater mixed with vinegar. It's a ritual more than a necessity. Hygiene is misunderstood. Most believe disease travels through bad air, miasma. Washing is sometimes thought to weaken the body. You do what feels right, even if it's wrong. By late afternoon, the sun is a dull smudge behind cloud. You make your way toward the city outskirts, where the grave pits yaw wide like silent mouths. You do not look too long. The trench is already full. A man with a cart waits nearby, handkerchief over his nose. He nods as you pass, his eyes tired and hollow. One final stop. A wealthy merchant has fallen ill. His home smells of incense and honey. His servants keep their distance. You are invited to his chamber, where he lies in fine linens, his face soaked with sweat. You recognize the signs. You offer the same rituals, burned herbs, leeches, a prayer. His wife weeps softly in the corner. You say nothing. You have no cure. Night falls. You return to your small quarters, a single room near the apothecary. You remove your heavy coat, your mask, your gloves. Beneath it all, your skin is slick with sweat. You stare into a flickering candle and wash your hands in ash. The city has quieted again, but you know it is not over. Tomorrow will bring more cases, more uncertainty, more death. You are not a healer. You are a witness, a custodian of hope in hopeless times. And still, you will rise again with the morning mist. Imagine yourself beneath the wide, honey-colored skies of 10th century Persia. The scent of jasmine drifts through narrow stone alleys, mingling with the faint aroma of ink, parchment, and well-worn sandals. In the bustling city of Bukharoth, the center of culture, trade, and scholarship, a boy named Ibn Sina quietly opens a book beneath the flicker of an oil lamp. He is barely a teenager, but his eyes move with the focus of a man twice his age. In the cool silence of his study, knowledge blooms. He is not yet Avicenna, as the West will later call him. For now, he is simply Ababu Alk, a prodigious youth devouring Greek texts translated into Arabic, the works of Galen and Hippocrates, the logical musings of Aristotle, the philosophical inquiries of Plato, and soon, his own observations. At 16, he is already practicing medicine. By 21, he has written works so comprehensive, so methodical, that scholars would study them for nearly 600 years. His most famous, Al-Qanon fi al-Tibata, Canon of Medicine. You can almost picture the text, thick and heavy, its pages covered in delicate script and diagrams. It lays out the humors, yes, but also symptoms, diagnostics, pharmacology, and hygiene. The canon is not mystical, but meticulous. It catalogs diseases. It classifies remedies. It compares outcomes. And yet, it is not cold. Avicenna believed in balance, in the soul's connection to the body. He prescribed music for melancholy, baths for fatigue, diet for strength. He thought deeply about how emotion shaped illness, how environment molded the body. For a time, it feels like medicine is moving forward. The Islamic world, from Baghdad too, is alight with scholars and physicians. Hospitals are built with gardens and fountains. Doctors must pass exams. Manuscripts are copied and preserved. But as Avicenna grows older, so too do the winds of politics shift. He serves in courts, not always willingly. His philosophical views, blending reason with faith, are controversial. He is imprisoned. He escapes. He writes in hiding. He continues working even when ill, treating patients from his sickbed. Eventually, in the year 1037, he passes away, quietly, in Hamadan. A man who knew more about the body than most, defeated by the same frailties he studied for decades. But his books live on. And this is where East meets West. Centuries later, in the stone-walled universities of Europe, Avicenna's canon becomes a cornerstone of medical teaching. Monks and scholars pore over Latin translations. His name becomes Latinized Avicennian. He is quoted with reverence, but something curious happens. As the canon is copied and interpreted, it begins to mix with something else, superstition. Where Avicenna spoke of careful diagnosis, some later readers saw symbols. Where he advocated observation, others inserted omens. Astrology creeps in. Charts of planetary influence are added beside anatomical diagrams. People begin to believe that a surgery must be done during certain moon phases, or that illness reflects celestial punishment. The clear lines of Avicenna's logic blur. In some texts, his remedies are replaced with charms. In others, his emphasis on hygiene is ignored entirely. What survives is not always what he intended. Still, for hundreds of years, through plague, war, and religious upheaval, his ideas remain a guiding light. Even when misunderstood, they anchor generations of physicians in the notion that medicine could be studied, that it could be reasoned, that healing was more than hope. And somewhere in a dim European chamber, a student by candlelight reads his name and dreams of understanding the body's hidden truths. Imagine yourself underground. The air is cool, heavy with stillness. Stone walls surround you, and flickering torchlight glints off something dull and metallic half buried in dust. A small, curved hook, a thin pair of pincers, a rusted bronze scalpel, still sharp after 2 millennia. These are the remnants of ancient medicine, not in textbooks or scrolls, but in tombs, crypts, and lost storehouses. They speak a quiet language, the language of tools. We begin in ancient Rome, where medicine was a curious blend of Greek theory, battlefield necessity, and local superstition. In the ruins of Pompeii and Herculaneum, archaeologists have unearthed dozens of medical kits, compact wooden or leather cases, not unlike modern first aid kits. Within them, probes, forceps, scalpels, speculums, and cautery irons. Each tool meticulously crafted, some with ivory handles, others of gleaming bronze. Some are simple, others so strangely shaped that their function remains a subject of speculation even now. Take, for example, the vaginal speculum, eerily similar in design to the one used today. It has a screw mechanism. It expands. It was used calmly, methodically, to examine the body's hidden interiors. Then there's the cautery iron. Heated until red hot, it was pressed to the skin to stop bleeding, seal wounds, or treat infections. The searing pain was, in theory, a sign of healing. And yet, anesthesia as we understand it did not exist. Instead, patients drank mixtures of opium, vinegar, wine, or mandrake root. Some passed out, others did not. Surgeons worked quickly, quietly, often by candlelight. One common tool was the uvula exciser, designed to snip away excess tissue at the back of the throat, believed to cause snoring or choking. Another, bone elevators, used to lift fractured skull fragments. And then there were trephinous, small circular saws used for trepanation. drilling holes into the skull to relieve pressure, cure madness, or, occasionally, release evil spirits. It is tempting to see these implements as crude, but many were marvels of precision for their time. Even ancient Greeks, like Hippocrates, described the difference between clean incisions and ragged wounds. Some Roman texts caution against overuse of the scalpel. They advise, a good physician heals with words, not just knives. Across the Mediterranean, in Egypt, tomb paintings show surgical scenes, bandaging, splints, even early dentistry. In Edfu, a surgical instrument set was found in a tomb organized neatly, wrapped in linen. These tools were often made of copper and beautifully crafted. The Egyptians understood infection, at least in theory. They washed wounds with beer, honey, and crushed herbs. Honey, as it turns out, was mildly antibacterial. Farther east, in ancient India, surgical texts, like the Sushruta Samhita, described over 300 procedures. Sushruta detailed how to perform cataract surgery using a sharp needle to dislodge the lens, primitive, yes, but remarkably close in spirit to modern techniques. His texts also described antiseptic baths and wound care. The same pattern repeats: simple tools, painful procedures, but behind them, minds trying to understand the body as a puzzle, one that could, perhaps, be fixed. And yet, not all tools were for healing. Some devices unearthed in ancient burial sites raise questions. Long rods with hooks, clamps with odd teeth, implements that resemble instruments of torture. Historians debate, were these for surgery or for punishment? The lines between the two, in some eras, were disturbingly thin. In medieval monasteries, surgical tools were kept locked away, sometimes beside relics and sacred texts. Surgeons were often monks, trained more in theology than anatomy. Their tools were blessed, their hands were steady, but their knowledge was fragmentary. Even in more advanced periods, many instruments were reused again and again. Sterilization was a foreign concept. Boiling water was sometimes applied, but not reliably. More often, tools were wiped with cloth and returned to the pouch. Infection was a silent, creeping outcome. Still, the tools remain, displayed now in museums. Quiet, oddly beautiful, cold metal that once burned with urgency. A scalpel left on a battlefield. A clamp dropped in a storm-ravaged hospital. A bone chisel that once made a decision no one else could. And so, through these fragments, we glimpse the eternal struggle between suffering and relief, between hope and what the body allows. Imagine yourself in a palace. The halls are hushed. The light of morning filters in through tall stained glass windows, casting a soft amber glow across tiled floors. You are in a royal chamber, where a king lies feverish beneath embroidered sheets, and the physician at his side wears robes of deep velvet, not the simple linen of a common doctor. Here, medicine is not just healing, it is performance, ritual, and above all, symbolism. In the royal courts of medieval and early modern Europe, a physician's role was complex. They were healers, yes, but also astrologers, confidants, and sometimes pawns in courtly politics. Their success or failure could sway power, inheritance, and national destiny. Let us begin with the curious case of powdered gold. It was believed, in certain circles, that ingesting gold, yes, the metal could rejuvenate the body, purify the humors, and restore lost vitality. Gold was mixed into tinctures, crushed into pastes, or dissolved in acids to be administered as medicine. It was expensive, rare, and alchemical in nature. So did various popes and sultans. It resists decay. What better way to ward off mortality? But gold was not the only substance imbued with prestige. And yes, poison was a very real concern. In royal circles, illness was rarely seen as a natural misfortune. It was suspect. Whispers of treachery were never far from the sickbed. Physicians walked a narrow line. If they failed to cure, suspicion could fall on them. If they succeeded too well, they might be seen as sorcerers. This led to elaborate courtly rituals surrounding medicine. Before a treatment was administered, a royal physician might consult the stars. Astrology and medicine were deeply entwined. Certain days were better for bloodletting. Even urine had its moment of glory. Physicians would collect samples in round glass flasks called metulas, holding them up to the light to observe color, clarity, and even bubbles. And then there were the more unusual treatments. For skin ailments, puppy fat was sometimes rendered into ointments. For melancholy, the fumes of burnt peacock feathers were inhaled. To cure gout, a poultice of roasted earthworms and vinegar might be applied. Royal physicians kept them in ornate jars of fin, wrapped in silk and labeled with Latin tags. A sluggish king, he needed less blood. A feverish queen, she required more bile, perhaps purged through emetics. In some courts, treatments were accompanied by music to soothe the spirit. In others, priests stood nearby, offering prayers alongside poultices. A royal illness was a public event, watched closely by ambassadors, heirs, and rivals. And in death, the physician still played a role. Autopsies were rare, but not unheard of. More often, it was the physician who composed the official cause of death, carefully avoiding language that might imply scandal or failure. A sudden imbalance of the humors, or a chill caught in the night air. Such phrases concealed more than they revealed. Even the greatest physicians like Ambroise, who served kings of France, knew their knowledge was both revered and doubted, favored gentle treatment over cauterization, and believed in the body's ability to heal. So we return, finally, to that quiet chamber. The king sleeps now. The candles burn low. In this world, medicine is mystery. Not just herbs and wounds and symptoms, but dreams and omens, symbols and silence. And through it all, the healer walks alone between power and decay, between reverence and suspicion. His is not just a science, it is a role, a ritual, a quiet performance in the theater of kings. And so, the long, winding corridors of early medicine begin to dim behind us. You've wandered through plague-ridden alleys, where the air was thick with dread and clove-stuffed masks offered little comfort. You've stood beside the brilliant, yet often forgotten Avicenna, his scrolls spreading reason through a world still heavy with superstition. And you've walked the velvet-draped chambers of royalty, where powdered gold met whispered prayers, and a single fever might shift the fate of empires. What a strange, stubborn journey it was. Medicine, in those centuries, was as much about belief as it was about bodies. It wove together stars and scriptures, herbs and hope. It misunderstood, it guessed, it wandered, but always it reached. There's something oddly comforting in that, isn't there? Even when the tools were crude and the knowledge incomplete, people tried. They wrapped wounds, they watched the sky. They brewed teas and braved plagues. They sat beside the sick, just as we still do now. The rhythms of their lives, their care, their fear, their fumbling kindness echo faintly in our own. The human longing to heal remains unchanged. So now, dear listener, allow your mind to soften. The flickering torchlight of history fades. Let it. You've wandered enough for one night. The ancient streets grow quiet again. The scrolls are rolled and set gently on the shelf. The jars are corked. The bells no longer ring. Somewhere, a physician sits with folded hands, waiting in silence for the dawn. And you are safe, here, now. Let the past settle behind you like dust on old stone. Breathe slowly, deeply. The night is long and restful, and sleep is near. Good night.